Dan Biggar has revealed what he thinks sets the Springboks aside from any other team and what ultimately led them to winning the World Cup. So for some context, Jim Hamilton has done some interviews with Pieter-Steph du Toit, Damien de Allende and Ardie Savea, which should be coming out pretty soon. But Jim Hamilton and Dan Biggar sat down on the Rugby pod and basically broke down what these players said in those interviews, and Dan Biggar gives his input into what Jim Hamilton's saying and basically reveals what he thinks is the difference between South Africa and all these other rugby nations and how they came to win this last World Cup. I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions as a South African on what Dan Biggar and Jim Hamilton are about to say, but before we do that, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we need your support to do it. Let's get in to the video.
The main thing that jumped out at me, and I didn't know whether to bring it up with Damien de Allende in particular, because I know he's quite open. I could feel the interview, he was opening up more and more about different things. But in Chasing the Sun 2, they talk about the relationship between Duane Vermeulen, Ebenet Sabeth and Siya Kolisi.
Now, just before he jumps into what he's about to say, that we did see that in Chasing the Sun too, the sort of friction between the top dogs in the Springbok camp. They didn't really dive too deep into that relationship. They kind of just touched on the fact that Eben, Siya and Duane Vermeulen sometimes agree to disagree on certain types of things, but the most important thing that came out of that is that they shouldn't do it in front of the team, but rather go behind closed doors, sort out their issues, sort out what they're thinking, and come to the team as a unit to present what they need to do going forward.
And how there's friction and how they don't see eye to eye. And then because Damien was so open, I kind of asked him about that, which will be a headline answer and almost a bit kind of clickbaity from that point of view. But I asked him just out of interest, and I said, like, how is that as a player where you've got the three biggest alpha males, the most physical guys in your team, the highest profile players, and there's issues? So him talking about the dynamics of the squad was really interesting, because I'd always find that uncomfortable. Like, you know what I mean? Because we've all been in teams where it can be a bit awkward. So that blew my mind as well.
Look, I think when there are such big players in a team, we often see it in football, when there's superstars in the same team, they often create a lot of friction within the team, within the dressing room, and most of the time it's not always a good thing. But I think the difference is, and I think they're going to touch on it in a couple of minutes, but Duane Vermeulen, Ebenet Sabeth and Siya Kolisi all come from South Africa. They all believe in the same goal. And maybe that is the superpower of the Springbok side, is that there is a bigger cause above all of these players. The South African way, the rugby South African way that I think Rassie Erasmus and Jacques Nienaber did a very good job at, is keeping these superstars humble and keeping them on the right lane, on the right path to sort of accomplish this goal for South Africa, not just for their individual purposes, which is why I think they work so well together.
Do you know what, though, Jim? I reckon I see that as such a positive, that there's friction between your big players and your leaders and things, because they all want the same thing. They all want to raise standards. They all want to make sure that the team is lifting the trophy at the end of the tournament or the end of the match or whatever. And it's funny, actually, because I read Gary Neville's autobiography quite a long time ago, and he was saying that in that great Man United team that won the treble, he was saying that Roy Keane, Sheringham, Schmeichel, there was 3 or 4 players who actually did not dislike each other, didn't like each other as people, but when they got on the training pitch, or they got in a meeting room, or when they got on the, whatever it was, training pitch, match pitch, whatever, they just pulled and they wanted to win so much that they brought people with them, and they sort of forgot about perhaps the personalities, and they left their egos on the side and they just pulled together. And that sounds exactly what that sounds like. They've got 3 unbelievable players, leaders, personalities, and they just it seems like every successful, proper successful team have got a little bit of that in it. You know what I mean?
Exactly what Dan Biggar said there. They don't have to like each other outside of the pitch, outside of the training grounds. But when they come together and they're representing South Africa and they're representing the 23 men that are on that field trying to win South Africa a World Cup, they need to come together and they need to sort of cause that friction between each other, which then sparks a little bit of a fire. Maybe they come up with different plans because of that, but they don't have to agree. They just have to agree together eventually after they've sort of discussed it and etched it out. And I do think there is a little bit of a pecking order within the Springboks. Obviously, Siya Kolisi is captain, but we have seen that there's a large leadership group under Siya Kolisi, Dwayne Vermeulen, Eben Etzebeth. We saw Handré Pollard give the pre-match and the halftime speech in the World Cup final. We saw Peter Steff stand up at halftime during England. So there's a lot of leadership within that South African side, which again can cause a lot of friction because there's a lot of personalities, there's a lot of voices talking. But when they come together and they put it all together, it creates something beautiful. And I think that's what gives them that little bit of an edge over these other nations.
Exactly. And also off the back of that, and I picked this up with Damien, but also with Brody, and it'd be interesting to hear your opinion on this as well, Biggs, because when you talk to South Africans and whenever you hear about South African rugby, the tagline is, and tagline's a bit disrespectful, but just for this, just hear me out. The tagline is, it means more.
And that's exactly what we're talking about here. There's a bigger picture than just one player. And I think in a lot of other sports, this doesn't get represented well because there's superstars in a lot of sports that sort of take over the team and sort of poison it from the inside. But for the Springbok side, there's a way bigger goal than just winning a World Cup. It's what the World Cup does for the country. It's what it does for the up-and-coming players, the up-and-coming kids, what it does for everyone under the umbrella of South Africa. So to hear Damien Delende and Peter Steff du Toit speak on this is going to be very, very interesting.
You know what I mean? It means more than rugby. And chatting to Ardy and chatting to Brody and referencing Chasing the Sun 2, their biggest foes being the Springboks, I asked about their emotional drivers for the All Blacks because, yes, you've got the haka, which is incredibly powerful and emotional. And they didn't say it, but I got the impression that their reason why they didn't really have one. And for them, it was very structured. It was very strategy based, right? This is how we...
What he's talking about here is New Zealand and the difference between New Zealand and South Africa. We've said it for many, many years that the haka for New Zealand is a little bit of an unfair advantage before a game because it pumps them up. It really gets them together. They're in sync. And for the Springboks facing New Zealand in a World Cup final, they had to find something else that was going to motivate them and drive them, which ultimately was South Africa and doing it for a bigger cause. And this isn't about rugby, this is about a country. And Jim Hamilton kind of goes on to say that New Zealand don't really have that driver. They don't have, this isn't for New Zealand. Yes, they have the haka beforehand, but they're more robotic about the way they go about it. They stick to their systems and it's difficult to put into words, but it sounds like they don't really have that overarching why. Why are we trying to win this World Cup? It's more, this is our job, let's go out and do it. Where the Springboks there is that overarching why. Why are we trying to win this World Cup for South Africa?
But speaking to Damien and Peter Steff du Toit, it means more. I could feel it. So when they're telling me, and the way that they're telling me, Peter Steff's almost in tears talking about what it means to play for South Africa. We're talking about one of the best players to have ever walked the fucking planet. And we're walking amongst bamboo trees that are creaking, and he's almost in tears in Japan, where no one really knows him, no one sees him. I'm like, that is it. He means it.
And I think this is what Chasing the Sun has given us. This is what these type of interviews give us. Because in the past, you'd see a player like Peter Steff du Toit, but you wouldn't know who he is. You'd see him for 80 minutes on a Saturday for a couple of weeks of the year playing for the Springboks, but you wouldn't really get to know the Peter Steff du Toit. And for us to get inside info and into the behind the scenes of that change room, especially in the semi-final against England, where he kind of stands up and gives the team energy. He says a couple of sentences that really get the team together. It's really something special. And I think that's the biggest thing that Chasing the Sun and interviews like what Jim Hamilton's does with these players, it gives us more of an inside look into these players. It allows us to love them more as a person instead of a rugby player or an idol. So I think that's very, very powerful. And we'll probably continue to see these sport documentaries come out and give us an inside look into all of these superstar players.
Do you know what my take from that, Jim, is that you look at the World Cup that's just been, the one that they just won, the quarterfinals, the semi-finals, and the final. All 3 games, they could easily have lost those 3 games, couldn't they? But they ended up winning by 1 point. So when you break down what they just said in terms of that it means more, that that's their why for the country, for what's going on in South Africa, etc. Because when you play up again, when you put New Zealand against South Africa, or England against South Africa, or Ireland against New Zealand, you know what it's like. Very, very rarely it just comes down to sort of like 1%ers. And sometimes if it does mean that much more to them, then maybe Peter Steph is going to get up and make 1 more tackle when he's tired. Maybe Damien Dillard is going to fight for an extra yard when he's tired and in that close contact. Maybe they're going to give that just that 1%. And if you add all those 1% up, you end up winning by a point, not losing by a point. And I think that's, for me, that would be my takeaway, is that not that any other team is less motivated than the Springboks or want to win less than the Springboks. But sometimes, like you said, if that's their why and they're doing it for those reasons, then you just find just that 1-2% more in you to get yourself over the line in big games.
I think Dan Biggar has summed it up perfectly of what it means to be a Springbok, what it means to be part of that Springbok team, from the coaching staff to the physios to the players. We see it in Chasing the Sun, where they just go that extra mile in every sense of the word. Every single day they go that extra mile, which then results in them winning a quarterfinal by 1 point, a semi-final by 1 point, and a final by 1 point. And I really think that is the secret sauce behind the Springboks. What gives them that extra 1 or 2% in those big games against New Zealand, Ireland, France, England. That is the secret sauce behind the Springboks. And I don't think it's ever been said in a more perfect way than what Dan Biggar just described it there. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments. What do you think is South Africa's secret sauce? Make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave this video a like, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take it easy. Peace.